She always thought the worst thing her brother could do was control her choices. She was wrong. The worst thing was smiling while he did it. Meredith Calloway was 28 years old when her father died on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of gray, drizzling morning that felt like the sky itself had been wrung out. She got the call at 6:43 while she was still in her scrubs, halfway through a 12-hour shift at St. Michael's Hospital in Halifax. She drove to Truro in a fog, running 2 yellow lights she barely registered, and by the time she pulled into the long gravel driveway of the house she grew up in, her brother Graham was already standing on the porch with a coffee mug in his hand, looking less like a grieving son and more like a man who had just inherited a property, which, as it turned out, was exactly what he was thinking about. Their father, Robert Calloway, had been a quiet, stubborn man who built his landscaping business from a single borrowed truck into something worth real money. He had a house on 2 acres outside Truro, a commercial property in Dartmouth, and savings that Meredith had never thought much about, because money had never felt like the point of anything in their family. She was a nurse. She cared about people. Graham was in real estate, which Meredith had always thought was a reasonable career, until she understood that Graham did not see the world as containing people so much as it contained opportunities. Their mother, Carol, had passed 6 years earlier. After that, it had just been the 3 of them, Meredith, Robert, and Graham, and the distance between Halifax and Truro that Meredith crossed every few weekends to bring her father groceries and sit with him on the porch while he complained about the weather and the price of fuel. She loved him. He was not a warm man, but he was hers, and she had never once questioned that he loved her back. She should have read the will herself. That was the first mistake. Graham handled everything. He said he would, and Meredith let him because she was exhausted and sad, and still wearing the same jeans she had put on the morning her father died. Graham organized the funeral home, the obituary, the reception at the Legion Hall where her father had gone every Friday for 30 years. Meredith made the sandwiches and thanked people for coming, and accepted hugs from women she hadn't seen since high school. She cried 3 times, once in the parking lot, once in the bathroom, and once at 2 in the morning back in her childhood bedroom while looking at a photo of the 4 of them at Peggy's Cove from 1999. She did not cry when Graham sat her down at the kitchen table 2 weeks after the funeral and explained what the will said. She went very still instead. The house and the Dartmouth property were to be divided equally between them, but the operational control of the business, the contracts, the equipment, the employees, the accounts, had been placed in a trust managed solely by Graham for a period of 5 years, at which point Meredith could request a buyout. The lawyer had drafted it years ago, Graham explained, when Robert had decided that a business needed 1 person at the helm and not 2. He had chosen Graham because Graham understood the financial side. It made sense. It was practical. Meredith asked if she had known about this. Graham said their father had mentioned it. She tried to remember any such conversation and found nothing. There were 10 full-time employees who had worked for Calloway Landscaping for years. There was a supervisor named Harold who had been with the company since before Meredith finished high school. There was a woman named Bev who ran the office and knew where everything was and had sent Meredith a card when her mother died. These were real people with real livelihoods attached to a business that now had Graham's name on the door in all the ways that mattered. Meredith was a 50% owner of the assets. She had no say in how any of it ran. She drove back to Halifax that night and sat in her apartment for a long time without turning on any lights. She told herself it was fine. Her father had made a decision. It was his business. His right. Graham was capable, even if he was not warm, even if he had a habit of talking over her at the dinner table and referring to her career as just nursing in the way that suggested the just was the most important word. She would get her share eventually. She had her own income. She did not need the business to survive. But it was not really about the money. She understood that slowly, in pieces, the way you understand something that has been true for a long time, but that you kept looking away from. It was about the fact that Graham had always assumed he would be the one in charge. Of the business, yes, but also of her. He had opinions about where she lived. He thought Halifax was too far. He thought she should come back to Truro, maybe buy something near the house, be available. He said available, but what he meant was visible. He wanted to be able to account for her. When she had dated a man named Paul for 2 years and brought him home for Christmas, Graham had found reasons to dislike him that changed every time Meredith addressed one. Paul was too quiet, then too loud, then too focused on his career, then not focused enough. Paul eventually stopped coming to Truro, and Meredith eventually stopped arguing about it. And, Somewhere in that process, she had absorbed the lesson that it was easier not to try. She was 28 years old and she had, without fully knowing, arranged her life around her brother's approval. That understanding landed on a Sunday in November, 3 weeks after the funeral, when Graham called to tell her she should not renew her apartment lease in the spring. He had a property in Truro, a rental unit that had just come available, and it would be good for her to be closer to home. It was a smaller place, but the rent was reasonable, and she would be near the house, which needed someone to keep an eye on it, now that their father was gone. He had not asked if she wanted to move. He had not asked if she liked Halifax or if she had a life there that meant something to her. He had simply presented it as the obvious next step and moved on to talking about the gutters on the family home. Meredith said she would think about it. Then she hung up and sat on her kitchen floor, which was something she had not done since she was 7 years old, and upset about something she could no longer remember, and she thought, I am not moving to Truro. The thought came out so clearly that she almost laughed. I am not moving to Truro. I am not going to manage my life around what is convenient for Graham, and I am going to find out exactly what is in that will and what my actual rights are. She called a lawyer on Monday morning, not the family lawyer who had drawn up the documents, a different one, a woman in Halifax named Forsyth, who specialized in estate disputes and had a very direct way of explaining things that Meredith found steadying. They met on her lunch break. Meredith brought the documents Graham had given her, which she had finally read in full the night before, sitting up with a highlighter and a cup of tea that went cold. There were things in those documents that Graham had not mentioned. The 5-year trust period was real, but there was also a clause, a small one, easy to miss if you were not looking, that allowed either beneficiary to request a formal audit of business operations and financial records at any time. Graham had not told her about this. He had, in fact, when she thought back on it, been very careful to explain the parts that confirmed his authority and glide past the parts that confirmed hers. Forsyth asked if she wanted to exercise that right. Meredith said yes. Graham called her that same evening. She was not sure how he knew, the lawyer perhaps, or Bev, or some other channel she was not aware of, but he knew, and he was not happy. He did not shout. Graham rarely shouted. He had a way of being angry that was quieter than anger, a kind of dense, pressurized disappointment that he could deploy very effectively. He said she was creating problems. He said the business was running fine, and an audit was an insult to his management, and an unnecessary stress on the employees. He said she was being emotional, which was what he always said when she disagreed with him. He said their father had trusted him and she was, by implication, not trusting their father. Meredith listened to all of it. Then she said, very calmly, that she was a co-owner of the estate and that she was exercising a legal right that the will explicitly granted her, and that she would appreciate if he directed any further concerns to Forsyth. The silence on the other end of the line lasted about 4 seconds. Graham said fine. He did not sound like he meant it. The audit took 6 weeks. During that time, Graham stopped calling. He sent 2 text messages, one asking if she planned to come for Christmas, one forwarding a photo of some roof damage on the family home, and both had the texture of messages designed to remind her that she was causing inconvenience. She came for Christmas. They sat at the same table and ate turkey and spoke entirely about things that did not matter, and Graham's wife, Lorraine, kept touching her arm in a sympathetic way that Meredith found more exhausting than the silence. She did not know, at Christmas, what the audit would find. She found out in January. There were irregularities. Not enormous, not dramatic, but real. Expenses that could not be fully accounted for. Charges to the business account that were difficult to categorize. A vehicle that appeared in the asset register but not in the actual yard. The auditor was careful in her language. Irregularities was the word she used. Discrepancies. Not fraud, not yet, but a picture that required explanation. Forsyth called Graham's lawyer. Graham's lawyer called Forsyth. There were several conversations that Meredith was not part of, and one that she was, where Graham explained that the vehicle had been a misunderstanding, that the expenses were legitimate, and he would provide documentation that the whole thing was being blown out of proportion by a sister who had never understood how a business worked. Meredith sat across the table from him in that meeting and looked at him very carefully, the way she had learned to look at patients who were telling her one thing, but whose bodies were saying something else. And she understood that Graham was frightened. Good, she thought, and then felt guilty for thinking it, and then stopped feeling guilty. She did not want to destroy her brother. She wanted to be treated as an equal owner of something that their father had built and that belonged to both of them. She wanted Graham to stop managing her, like she was a problem he was responsible for. She wanted, more than anything, to stop shrinking herself into a shape that fit the space Graham had decided to leave for her. The settlement took 4 months. In the end, Graham agreed to bring in a professional manager for the business, a third party who would oversee operations and report to both siblings, and to provide full documentation for the irregularities, most of which turned out to be, as he had said, legitimate but poorly recorded. There was one charge that was not: a personal trip to a landscaping conference in Vancouver that had been billed to the company. It was $1,100. In the context of everything else, it was almost funny how small it was. Graham paid it back and they agreed not to discuss it further. Meredith kept her apartment in Halifax. She renewed her lease in April, the same week the paperwork was finalized, and she did it with a feeling she could not quite name. Not happiness exactly, more like recognition. Like finding her own handwriting in a drawer after years of looking. She called Forsyth to thank her. Forsyth said she was welcome and to take care of herself. She called her colleague Tamsin, who had been the only person outside of work who knew the whole story. And Tamsin came over with wine and takeout from the Thai place 2 blocks over, and they sat on Meredith's small balcony in the April cold, wearing their coats and talking until midnight. It was the first time in months that Meredith had felt like herself in the full sense, not performing patience or performing reasonableness or performing whatever version of a manageable sister Graham seemed to need. She was 32 years old, and she had spent 4 months learning to take up space. Graham called in May. He said he wanted to meet for dinner when she was next in Truro. He said things had been hard and he knew it. He stopped short of apologizing, but the air around what he said had a quality that she recognized. Something effortful, something that cost him. She said she would come in June. She did not know yet if they would be fine. She did not know if fine was even the right word for whatever their relationship would become, now that it had been taken apart and put back together with different pieces. She knew that she would always be his sister, and that she had loved her father, and that the company her father built was still out there somewhere between them. The employees clocking in every morning, Harold supervising the crews, Bev answering the phones. She knew that she was not moving to Truro. She knew that she would not spend another decade arranging herself around a space that someone else had decided was enough for her. There was a man she had started seeing in March, a teacher named Emmett, who asked her questions and actually waited for the answers and made very good coffee, and had, without any fuss, driven her to the airport when she needed to fly to Toronto for a deposition. She was not sure what they were yet, but she liked who she was when she was around him. Direct, unhurried, not managing anyone's feelings except her own. That felt like something worth paying attention to. The drizzle on the morning her father died, the gravel driveway, Graham on the porch with his coffee mug. She thought about it sometimes. She thought about how she had walked past him into the house and gone straight to her father's room, and sat beside the bed for a long time, holding her father's hand even though he was already gone, because there was something she needed to say to him, even if he could not hear it. She told him that she was glad he existed. She told him she was sorry she had not come more often. She told him that she knew he had done what he thought was right, and that she was going to try to understand it, but that she was also going to take care of herself, and she hoped he knew what that meant. She thought he probably did. He was stubborn, not cruel. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and went to make coffee, because someone had to, and Graham was still on the porch. She made enough for both of them. That was the thing about family. You did not have to choose between loving them and knowing exactly who they were. You could hold both. It was uncomfortable, and it was also, she was beginning to understand, the most honest thing she had ever done.